Welcome to the Ideas on Stage podcast, your regular insight into leadership communication.
Hey Alex, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Alex, I'm super excited about this conversation today, and I want to cover so many things. We are going to talk about, of course, LinkedIn and authenticity and storytelling and other things, and how all of that relates to communication as well. But before we get started, we need to just touch a curiosity that I have. And now I've been doing a bit of stalking with you in preparation for this chat. And now last year, I discovered, maybe it was too late, I don't know, but maybe it all started many years ago, I don't know now, but I discovered for the first time the LinkedIn local hashtag and campaign and initiative. So you could actually meet your LinkedIn connections. It was a great initiative. And then, if I'm not wrong, I found out in preparation for this conversation that you were the creator or the co-creator of that campaign. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, I'm one of the co-founders of that campaign.
Wow, that's amazing. And for those who don't know, for our listeners who don't know what that campaign is, could you tell us more about it?
Sure. It didn't start off as a campaign. It started off as an idea that a lady called Anna McAfee had, and she was based out of Coffs Harbour, outside of Sydney. And she had the idea of, what it would be like to meet up with her LinkedIn connections offline, especially that she was in quite a small area and she didn't really know her connections too well. And, being a mum and running her own business, she wanted to kind of be able to connect with other entrepreneurs. And I just left my corporate job in the city, and I was sort of experiencing something similar where, despite being an introvert, I was missing the human interaction of when you set up a business. And what I was finding is that even though I was going to networking events, it was very salesy. People were trying to get something from you. And it just didn't feel like somewhere that I was sort of empowered and inspired and, surrounded by like-minded people. So when I saw Anna's idea that she'd hashtag LinkedIn local, I got in touch with her and I said, I'd love to find out more. I'm doing something similar. At the time, I had a hashtag of my own that was virtual to reality, where I was bringing my connections offline for a coffee, no agenda, just getting to know them. So it seemed like a natural progression for me to go from that one-to-one to doing it in a group setting. And two other people got in touch with Anna, Eric Eklund in Brussels and a guy called Manu Goswami that flitted between sort of New York and Singapore. And so we all decided to try this out, to get people to come offline, and no sales, no pitching, no agendas, just getting to know the people behind the profile. And in about September time, Manu did a post that got viewed by the former CEO of LinkedIn, Jeff Weiner. 1.4 million people saw that post. I then had one of my events that was on a boat just off South Bank that was videoed by someone, so people could start to see what was happening in the events and notice that actually this had a slightly different feeling to a traditional networking event. And then we just got inundated with requests of, how do I set one up? What's the ethos? What is it about? How can I get involved? How can I help? And it went from being 4 people in 4 countries and 4 cities to like, okay, well, now we need some form of organization. And we got really lucky that a guy called Ryan Troll approached us and said, do you guys need a website? Because we were getting asked a lot, the hashtag became so big that it became impossible to track where events were for people. And we had a lot of people that were commuting for work, for business, and wanted to meet people locally. Sometimes that can be also quite a lonely process, or people moving to countries and wanting to take advantage of meeting new people, professional people. And so he very kindly, because this was all pro bono, free, an initiative that started organically. We had a website, then we started onboarding people, and then before we knew it, we'd onboarded over 1,000 people in 2 years.
Wow.
We had these events across 90 countries, in hundreds of cities across the world, and it just became this massive movement, and to date, the biggest campaign on LinkedIn.
Wow, it's fascinating. From just an idea, one person, four people, to hundreds of thousands of people, hundreds of cities. It's fascinating. And actually, before, Alex, you mentioned that at that time you had left the corporate world. And another thing that I found very interesting about you was that I don't know that if it must have been a few years ago now, I don't know, but you wrote a very interesting post on LinkedIn, and I have it here with me. And what I would like to do is I would like to read that post for our listeners, and then I would like you to tell us a little bit more about the backstory and what happened after that post. Okay.
No problem. Yeah.
So for our listeners, imagine a picture yourself. You've got Alex looking out a window from a tall building in London. And the post says, when I was a little girl, I used to secretly dream of working in the really tall building with the pointy top by the river. As I find myself looking out from the 45th floor, I reflect on how wrong my definition of success was. Society, media, family, peers lead us to believe that success is money, status, and power. What they fail to explain is it comes at a price. Burnout, stress, broken relationships, depression, to name a few. So as I bid farewell to this view, I am grateful I got to the top of that really tall building with a pointy top by the river, because sometimes it takes getting to where you want to be to realize it's not where you're meant to be. Wow, that's great. I don't think that I'm the only one who has this wow, like this wow feeling when you read something like this. And I know that I'm not the only one, because a lot of people related and interacted with that post. Can you tell us more about what happened there?
Yeah, so I had, from a very young age, had come from quite humble beginnings, and had sort of furiously climbed my way up the corporate ladder. And I had this dream from when I was an 18-year-old that by the time I'm 30, I'm going to be in a leadership position, have a really good salary, nice designer clothes, travel internationally, and achieve the corporate dream / success. And I got it by the time I was 24. So by the time I was 24, I was headhunted by a foreign exchange company to be their head of learning and development. And it kind of catapulted me into a leadership position at a very young age, with everything that I'd ever dreamed of. And very quickly realized this isn't quite what I thought it was going to be. And let's just say that the rose-tinted glasses of that corporate dream very quickly were taken off. And I sort of instantly knew that something was off, that something just wasn't sitting quite right with me. And I went on this huge sort of journey of self-discovery and personal development, partly fueled by the role that I had that was actually to do with personal development and learning and development, but also partly out of curiosity. And then I, was in a very highly pressured job because it was just me. So I was everything from design to delivery to admin for anything, onboarding, product training, process training, sales training, everything fell under me. And I just started to kind of burn out, went through a period of depression, lots of stress, lots of anxiety, like going to work. And it just got to a point that it was like, I just can't sustain this anymore. Like, this is going to break me. And I had a colleague that was sort of quietly persistent, saying, you should go to therapy and talk to someone, and maybe that might help. And after kind of saying no for 3 months, I eventually caved and said, okay, fine, if you'll stop asking me. And I went, and that was really sort of the beginning of the end of understanding that actually I wasn't in a good environment for my mental health and that I needed to leave. And so I kind of left without really like a huge plan. But what I was noticing is that on LinkedIn back in February 2017, or the start of 2017, the tone of people's content was starting to change. And I don't mean a lot of people, but just a few pieces of content were really kind of going viral. And these were really kind of personal stories and stories around careers and endings and beginnings. And I thought, if I kind of study these posts, maybe I could create my own. And so there was a strategy behind it. It wasn't like I accidentally, wrote something in that way and posted it. I was very careful about how it was written and what time and that sort of thing. And then I posted it on my lunch break, on my last day of work. And by the time I got to my leaving drinks, 80,000 people had seen this post and my phone was going crazy. So it was a really surreal feeling of kind of feeling like finally I can let go of the mask that I've been wearing for so long. I say so long in my short corporate existence that was 3.5 years. But it felt like a long time because, wearing a mask for 3.5 years is long enough to feel like it's long. And that post was really kind of taking that mask off and going, never again will I put that back on. I will just be me. And I wanted to show people what, I think a lot of people go through in the city, but not a lot of people talk about. Yeah. And that was important to me.
Yeah. And that leads me to Authentic Alex, because after that post, then you wrote many other things. And one thing that I find really interesting about you and what you do is that you write about everything. And you've got this hashtag Authentic Alex, where you actually write about so many things, that even like especially personal things. And could you tell us more about what's behind that, why you do it? You say that, and you've touched on that now briefly, but you seem to suggest that even if LinkedIn is supposed to be a platform where you should only talk about professional stuff, actually what you've noticed is something different. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, when I started creating content on LinkedIn, I had been creating content 3 years before that post went viral. That's something worth mentioning because I think people instantly think, oh, you got lucky, that first post. And it's like, no, I was creating content way before, like when it wasn't cool to create content on LinkedIn. And now it is. That content before I went viral, it was very much around kind of career and personal and professional development, specifically for students and graduates. But that post that went viral opened me up to a whole different audience that I could tell was looking to have these conversations, but no one was ready to start them. And I was kind of like, I don't work for a company, so I don't feel, restricted as to what I can say. And I could see the value that it had in me sharing my story with so many people, either realizing the same thing or resonating with it, or, wanting to chime into the conversation. So I thought, what else can I talk about that isn't really talked about on LinkedIn or in the corporate world? And so I started to talk about my personal stories. So I talked about going to therapy. I talked about what it was like to go through depression in the city. I talked about having suicidal ideation from a young age. And so a lot of it was around kind of mental health and sort of some of my adversity and struggles. And for me, I think I had seen so much content on LinkedIn that showed the fast cars and the business and the private jets. And I thought, this isn't the reality of what it's like to run a business, or this isn't the reality of life. And I saw that there was an appetite for realness because there was very little of it on LinkedIn. I think there's a lot more of it now, especially with COVID. And so I kind of just decided to start sharing more of me. And I realized that people were interested in my story and following the journey. And I was sort of figuring it out. And I have always been figuring it out, and taking people on that journey. And they've bought into me and they've bought into my journey because they've seen it and have, I connected with someone interestingly yesterday and they were like, I've been following you for 2-3 years. And
stalking you.
Yeah. And it's crazy because, sometimes I never know that unless someone explicitly tells me. But I think, for me, it's never been about selling, even though I run a business. Interestingly, I think a lot of people don't actually know what I do for a living. And that's because I never tell people what I do. I don't want to sell in that way. And I totally respect people that create content around what it is that they sell and stuff. But for me, it's more important around like, what can I teach people and how can I, share with them a bit of who I am and hopefully add value to them. And if they're interested in, finding out more, they'll go to my profile, see what I do for a living and get in touch. But for me, it's more about the story. I think that really grips people more than learning about a certain subject or topic that is your expertise.
Yeah, and that's interesting. That's also, as I say, a communication strategy. So we've talked about the way you tell your own journey, personal stories, your vulnerability and authenticity on LinkedIn. But in general, I would say it's a communication strategy. What's your view on this? What's the role of vulnerability and authenticity in communication in general, not necessarily on LinkedIn? What do you think, Alex?
For me, it's really an opportunity to connect with your audience. It was really interesting because I take my clients through a process where I teach them about content creation, etc. And then I started to realize that actually, whilst they're very good at creating content around their expertise, they're really not that great around talking about who they are, why they do what they do, and what are they passionate about. And so I designed this story marketing course just to get people to start to create content from a place of purpose and almost like more heart-centered content that is more about how to tell their story than it is about how can I share my expertise? Because I think we're all naturally good at that. But actually, we find it very hard to share who we really are, especially on LinkedIn. The amount of people, I work with everything from students to CEOs that run million-pound companies. And there is always that fear of being judged if I put myself out there. What are people going to think? What if I say the wrong thing? Except, and the list is endless. And so what was interesting is that one of my clients that was, she had good engagement already, but she did this course with me, and then she wrote a piece of content and it was around her daughter and leadership, and she tied it back into work. So it's not that I'm saying just put personal stuff out there. I always say do it, but with a message or with intent. There's a purpose around that content and a message that you're trying to send to your audience. And instantly her engagement was ridiculously higher than before. And she was like, that's insane. And it's like, because you're showing people who you are. So many people can relate to being a mother. So many people can relate to, provoked by the thought of how does mothership and leadership tie in together. And so it's really about, people want to see who's behind that profile. And yet we're very good at hiding behind our titles or how we want to present ourselves to people. And actually, it's as simple as being ourselves.
Yeah. And you mentioned story marketing. And I know that we could spend 5 months talking about story marketing and the power of storytelling in communication if you want to be able to effectively communicate your ideas. But let's try. I would like to explore that a little bit more with you, Alex. Could you give us for example, you gave us the example now of that particular client that you had. Do you have other insights to share when it comes to the power of storytelling to tell your story?
Sure. So a good example is a client of mine who runs a recruitment company. And she's the founder and the CEO. And again, client that's very good at sharing who she is professionally. And one day there was an incident on the tube where someone had gotten stuck between the doors in terms in their neck. And she kind of leapt into action and started to kind of open the doors, and other people kind of came in and helped. And it was this whole event. And when the ordeal was all over, she kind of reflected back on it around, wow, like how people can come together in a time of crisis and how very different reactions of different people, in that situation. And she wrote a long article about this and how proud she was to be a Londoner and how she saw people unite, etc. And interestingly, I mean, she is, I think, naturally a good storyteller, so that helps, but the story wasn't work related, and yet it it said a lot about the way she reacted as a leader, in a situation of crisis, even though it wasn't a work-related situation. And again, that article had the most engagement she's ever had on LinkedIn. And I think that's a really good way of showing who she is as a leader. It's a good way of showing what's important to her in terms of her values. Unity is really like one of her key values. And I think generally like showing a little bit of who she is in terms of the context of, she was going out to the theater with her husband, etc. So, the ordinary person, despite running, a £15 million company. So I think this is, there's so many different ways and benefits of doing that. And I said to her after, what was the reaction? She said, well, obviously there was a lot of engagement, but there were people that I'd been trying to get in touch for work-related issues and I couldn't get a hold of them. And then they read that and they got in touch and said, I loved what you wrote about this, what happened on the tube. And she was like, how nuts is that? It has nothing to do with work. And yet it prompted people to get in touch with her, for work-related reasons. So I think, it's not the most obvious communication strategy, but I think the reason I personally like it is because it's very subtle. And I'm not a salesy, that kind of salesy person on LinkedIn, I find really icky. And so for me, it's like, how do I find a way to sell myself and market myself in a way that feels comfortable? And then how can I teach that to my clients? And for me, story has really worked on LinkedIn. I know so because I'm the proof of those strategies, and then I teach them to my clients.
Yeah, super powerful, great example. And you said that that lady was naturally a good storyteller. Now, you also say that, and this is not just about storytelling, but I read an article of yours where you say that naturally you were not a good writer, or you were not a natural writer maybe many years ago, but now you write a lot, you write in a very good way, in a successful way. So what happened? How do you go from a stage where you are not a natural writer, if I can put it this way, to a stage where you write very well in a successful way, in an effective way, bringing results?
You write a lot. Literally. I found writing quite hard from a young age. I grew up speaking, my mother tongue's actually Spanish, and I learned English at school. And because my mother's Colombian, I then spent a lot of time in Italy and in France. So
in Italy as well?
Yes.
I'm
so
Italian.
I speak Italian and French fluently.
Do you?
Yes. So from a very young age, I spoke 4 languages, and it meant that when it came to writing any of those languages, I really struggled because I could speak them fluently, but the grammar was just like a soup in my brain. And so when I went to school, I had missed a year of school where they teach grammar because I was studying in France. So I was 1 year behind. And then when I went to university, I was still struggling with writing. And it was just this constant battle of trying to write coherent sentences and get better. And it honestly started off with when I began blogging on LinkedIn, where I consistently wrote articles, and I thought, it doesn't really matter if it's not perfect, but as long as I can relatively communicate what I'm trying to share with people, with these students and graduates, sort of information that I think is valuable to them and I wish I'd known, then that will have to do. And it's trying to not get in the way of it needs to be perfect, so I'm rather not share it. And so it started off blogging back in July 2015. It's now been 5 years that I've been writing publicly, and I've written a lot. I've probably now in the period that I'm in now is the period I've written the most in those 5 years. And I think that's just because I've become a lot more comfortable with writing. I took a step back from creating content in 2019 quite a lot. So I think I've recouped my energy for it. And also I went on some creative writing courses that really kind of sparked my creativity and love of writing again. And also running my own writing courses in terms of the story marketing course. Again, it just has me more involved with writing. So if anyone is sort of looking for advice on the writing thing, it's just to write. And if you find it hard to write on your own, then go and find a course to get more into practice and have the accountability of writing with other people.
I like that, and I can relate to that 100%. It's very similar in my area. Now, I'm a presentation coach, and I work with business owners or professionals who maybe want to grow their business or increase their influence through great presenting. So it's about presentation skills and public speaking. And when they ask me, how do I become a better presenter? Just give more presentations, give presentations. And as you say, even if the first one is not perfect, it's fine. The second one will be a bit better, and the third one a bit better. And then maybe without realizing it, you get to a point where you are a good presenter. And it's the same thing, as I understand, when it comes to writing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Also, Alex, now you've been named LinkedIn Top Voice twice for the UK.
Yeah.
Amazing. Now, again, maybe you've covered most of it because we've talked about storytelling, so we understood what your approach is. But is there anything else from a communication perspective, communication strategy that you've used to get to the point twice?
Yeah, so I would definitely say, just to explain for anyone that doesn't know what LinkedIn Top Voice is, because sometimes people don't know, every year LinkedIn ranks, out of 25 million users in the UK, who are the top 12, 24 most influential content creators on the platform in that country. And for me, I mean, I definitely had that goal in mind. One day I wanted to be on that list, so I was working towards it. And so I was then creating content, and creating articles in order to be noticed. So having that goal in mind is the first step. And I think the second step is figuring out what you want to write about. So like I said, I don't talk about, what I do for a living is teaching people how to build their presence on LinkedIn, but you'll never see me create content on that. And the reason I don't as well is because I find it quite boring. Like, I love to teach it, but I think I'd find it quite boring to be like, hey, this is a new feature from LinkedIn, you should use it. I think I prefer writing about things that interest me. And for me, everything around kind of mental health and personal and professional growth are the areas that I like to write about. So knowing what is it that you can write about without you getting bored is a good place, because, if you have that kind of slump of like, oh, I'm not in the mood to write, it's going to be a lot harder if it's something that you're not interested and passionate about. So I think that's really important. And also figuring out, what's something that's of value to people, what can resonate with the audience that you're looking to speak to. So when I started, it was very much like a graduate and student audience that I was trying to speak to, and it was very specific around career development. And then after that viral post, the tone of my content changed, and it was very much around professional growth and mental health. And I would say that now, 5 years later, my tone is very much around kind of mental health / overcoming adversity. So I've got a newsletter called Trauma to Triumph, which documents what I'm learning in therapy. Now, I have no interest in, I'm not a therapist. I have no interest in, in my target audience being therapists or psychologists, but I just love to write about it. And I think it's really interesting. And I think a lot of people can get value out of it. So it's really finding what's your version of that.
Your approach to communicating on LinkedIn, and I guess everywhere, is super interesting to me, because you attract an audience, your audience, in an indirect way. So as you say, instead of talking about, okay, here is a new feature on LinkedIn, here is what you can do here, here's what you can do there, that's what we do, you talk about things which either are like not connected at all, or apparently not connected at all to what you do for a living, but that's how it works for you. That's super interesting.
Yeah. And, it's what I say to people, it's not rocket science. What I'm essentially doing is that I'm giving people the opportunity to know me through my writing and through my life experiences. I'm getting them to trust me because I'm creating conversations around things that are vulnerable. And I'm showing up authentically, and that know, like, and trust. So I'm getting them to like me because, you know, I engage with them in conversations. When they put a comment, when they share my content, when they message me privately, I'm communicating back to them. And through knowing, like, and trusting me, which is the, you know, standard for the sort of sales side of it, when they come to my profile, they'll see, oh, she teaches people how to do what she does on LinkedIn. And because I'm kind of, in a way, the end result of what that work looks like, that's how they're like, okay, well, I know, like, and trust her, and I see that she has the credibility because she's got the audience for herself. And so that's when they get in touch and say, hey, I'm also looking to do what you're doing for yourself. Could we have a chat? And I would say 9 times out of 10, that person's already made up their mind to work with me because they've seen me speak. And also because I am a public speaker offline as well, you know, in normal circumstances, they have the opportunity to meet me in person. And so those different touch points of my content on LinkedIn, meeting me at a conference or at a LinkedIn local, and then they eventually realizing that they want to do this work, and then they get in touch, and it's sort of like almost a done deal.
Yeah. Now that I can see that they're powerful, that combination of several touch points on different platforms, online, offline. Offline now it's a bit more difficult, but it's very powerful. And because you are also a public speaker, Alex, let's try to connect the two worlds. Let's say LinkedIn and, in general, content creation and those kind of platforms and public speaking. So do you have any tips or advice or insights that you'd like to share when it comes to leveraging a platform like LinkedIn if you are a public speaker?
It's okay. So this is really, really standard and such a simple thing, but I kid you not, so many people don't do this, is that they don't put speaker in their headline, like on their LinkedIn headline. And it's the simplest change ever. But so I would say a large proportion of some of the clients I work with are public speakers. And I say to them, you know, are you interested in doing more public speaking? And they're like, yes. And then I say, you know, why isn't it in your headline? And they're like, oh, I didn't think of that. And, you know, the headline is already one of the most important places on a LinkedIn profile to share with a potential, you know, client that they're looking for a speaker. So for example, once I was sitting on the other side of it, where I was working with a client that was wanting to organize an event for HR professionals, and I was looking after the whole event for them. It's not something I do, by the way. I just was doing it as a one-off favor for a friend. And they were looking to book a speaker that was very niche. And so my first thing was going onto LinkedIn and saying, you know, speaker in the search bar, people speaker. And I think it was, I'm trying to remember the specific topic. It was very, very niche, something around resilience, maybe, even more niche than that. And only 3 people came up that were specific, had that specific terminology of speaker in the topic I was looking for. And out of 3, only 1 had a good profile. So already it's narrowing down who I'm going to get in touch with. And then from getting in touch with them, how their profile looks, I'm narrowing it down again. And then the second thing I did is I did a post saying, does anyone know any speakers that can speak about this specific topic? So again, if people don't know, they can't refer you when those threads happen. And so I think that it's really important for you to be vocal that you're a speaker on LinkedIn, whether that's in your headline, in your summary, in the experience section. Again, in your experience section, like have a speaker section specifically. And if you run a company doing other things like workshops, you know, and that sort of thing, just add a new experience as a speaker and talk about what you talk about, why you talk about that, and where you've talked. It's so simple. It's like 2-3 short paragraphs, and it allows people that once they've seen that you're a speaker in your headline and they go down below, they can find out more. But it's, again, those are really simple things, but so often I see them not on people's profiles. And for example, when people get in touch with me for speaking, they already know what they want me to talk about specifically. And that's, I would say, largely due to the fact that I'm quite clear about what it is that I speak about in my profile.
That's great. And because you mentioned this, Alex, what do you think about those who, because I have to say, I like what you've just said. On the other hand, though, I see a lot of people who say speaker, I'm a speaker, but actually they are not. So what do you think about? I think that, of course, I agree with you 100%. If you are genuinely a speaker, that's the first thing you should do. I also see the other phase. A lot of people who are they're not really public speakers, but they say, I'm.
A question to you: what do you define as a public speaker?
Yeah, that's a great question. Now, I would say at least somebody who has spoken at some events. I wouldn't say necessarily being paid to speak. That's a professional speaker. It doesn't have to be there at that level. But really, I know people who have like almost never given a presentation at an event on behalf of another organization and things like that. And they say, I'm a speaker. So I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, and it's a good point. The reason I ask is that I have a bit of a gripe with people that work in the speaking space when they're like, oh, but when people are starting out, they shouldn't. And I'm just like, yeah, but at some point we all started out like that, right? And so I kind of get it, and I also don't. But I think that then it's up to the company to do their homework and find out, where has this person spoken, who has she spoken with, do they have a show reel, etc. So I think that's then up to the company that's spending the money, if they're paying to have someone speak, to kind of look into that. And also, when I speak at conferences, I always get the event organizer or the person that's booked me or the agent that's booked me to write a recommendation. And then I also get someone that was in the audience to write a recommendation. And so you can then start to see in the recommendations that actually, okay, she's good at what she does because she's got the credibility in terms of the references.
Yeah, absolutely. And another interesting thing I found, Alex, on your writing is that always connected to your speaking side of things is that you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if I remember well, you say that at the beginning, when you started giving presentations and speaking at events, it wasn't like the most natural thing for you. Maybe you didn't even enjoy it. Whereas now, if I understood correctly, you love it. You love presenting.
I mean, saying that I didn't like it is probably an understatement.
Okay. So I'm not wrong.
I hated it.
Okay, so that's great. So let's talk about it. So you hated it.
Didn't like it. Yeah.
You hated it, and now you love it. So what happened? How did you go from a state where you hated public speaking to a state where you love it?
Yeah, I mean, it's been such an interesting journey, and one I think I'm still on. But I'd been in the corporate world for about 2 years when I decided to move into this leadership position. And at the time, I actually got offered 3 jobs. One was to stay within the company and move internally. The other one was to work in a pharmaceutical company in a sales role. And the third one was this leadership role as head of training and development. Now, a lot of people, like the salaries were sort of similar. And a lot of people asked me, well, what made you pick that company? And I was definitely like, one sentence, it scares me. That role scared me because I hated presenting. And what does a training and development person do for 80% of their job? Present internally. And so I thought, if I'm ever going to get rid of this fear, it's just to like do it for a living. I mean, I don't know what logic that was, what had caused me to connect those dots and think, yeah, if I don't like it, I might as well do it for a living and get over it. And actually, that's really what happened. I started that role, and very quickly, my boss realized she's not very comfortable presenting. And he said, look, here's some budget. Go and fix it, because this is a huge part of your role. And I remember starting, I was presenting a little bit in my former role, or training, should I say. And I found it very nerve-wracking, like sweaty palms, heart racing, just anxious and stressed. And I went to a weekend workshop on speaking called the Speaking Adventure, that's run by a woman called Millie Baker. And I described it as a weekend that completely broke me down and then built me back up as a speaker. It was all to do with, how do I speak authentically? And actually, when people say, where was Authentic Alex born? As a concept, for me, it was that weekend. Because it was really me finding my voice and realizing that, especially as an introvert, I don't need to be a loud speaker in order to be heard. And that was such a wow moment for me, because I'm naturally quite a quiet person. So even when I'm on stage, I'm not, I would never say I'm a motivational speaker, because I'm not. And I wouldn't say that I'm going to get people like fist pumping in the air and all like, buzzed up. It's not my style.
Tony Robbins.
Exactly. And so it was really kind of getting comfortable with, I can be a speaker, and it doesn't have to be the way that we as a society naturally see speakers. And I think that's a lot of people comment on that when they see me speaking, is that there's either this like quiet confidence or, really inspirational, but not in a, in a cheesy or motivational way. And that to me is important. It's getting comfortable with myself, getting comfortable with the stories I have to tell, and also getting comfortable with speaking. And like exactly what you were saying is that over time, the more you do it, the more comfortable you become. And, for me, a large part of that story was having the opportunity to tell the LinkedIn local story at many LinkedIn locals. And so I was traveling not just in the UK, but abroad, telling people about the way that this concept has started. And the more I practiced that, the better I got at telling that story. And, again, whenever I present or I'm talking, a lot of my talks are very much with a story attached to it. It's not just kind of dumping a bunch of information on people. And that's, again, an important thing for me in terms of the style of the keynote speaker that I am.
Yeah, people remember stories much more than just facts and figures. Absolutely. And why here is that for you, though, the key thing that took you from a state where you hated speaking in public to a state where you actually love it is your decision to do it despite the fear, which is great. And I can relate to that. As a person, I've got the attitude, the same attitude. So it's not about not feeling the fear. Yeah, I feel the fear all the time in many areas of my personal and professional life. It's about making the decision of doing it, whatever that thing is. It could be public speaking, it could be writing an article on LinkedIn, whatever it is, doing it despite the fear. And you said, I don't know what the logic was. I don't know either, but I've got exactly the same approach.
Yeah, and I would definitely say is that doing it in a safe environment before you do it publicly is definitely, I would recommend, because doing it in Millie's workshop allowed me to be vulnerable and like really feel the fear in a very terrifying way. And actually, once I started doing publicly, there was less of that fear and less of the worry that I'll like mess it up. And again, I see it in the classes that I run in terms of writing. The writing stuff is that when I get people to write about vulnerable stories of their lives, sometimes they break down in my sessions because they have to share that story publicly in front of other people. But it's okay because it's a safe environment that's facilitated. And when they go and share the story publicly, they're already ready because they've worked with this story with other people publicly, but privately, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just out of curiosity, Alex, now that you've given a lot of presentations over the last years, before a presentation, whether it's face-to-face or online, do you still feel the nerves?
Yes, 100%. I think I would be very surprised if no one feels even a tingle.
I agree, 100%.
Before they go onto stage. They're there, but they're different. When you train with people like yourself, Andrea, and other speaking coaches, you'll learn that the similarities in excitement and nervousness. And it's that mindset of changing that feeling and also having techniques that help you center yourself and come back and ground yourself and breathe in order to kind of manage those nerves in a better way than, when you start.
Yeah.
And I've worked with speaking coaches before exactly for that. So I highly recommend it.
Yeah. Mark Twain said that there are only two types of speakers, those who get nervous and those who are liars. So I agree with you. If somebody says, no, I don't feel anything, I'm not really sure about that.
And if they don't, then I would be surprised if they can create an impacting
and connect
emotional and connected talk with their audience.
Agreed, 100%, absolutely. Alex, thank you so much. Before we close, now we've been talking about many things, LinkedIn and communication strategies and storytelling and public speaking, so many things, and I really enjoyed this conversation. Is there anything, like it could be a book? Now I love reading, so if you've got like a book or a few books that you would like to recommend to our listeners on any of the topics that we've talked about. It doesn't have to be a book, any resources or people to follow. Is there anything?
Yes, there is a book. I'm trying to figure out what the name is. I've got it over there. Can I see that far?
Feel free, Alex. Feel free.
Grab it. Yeah, 1 second.
Yeah, feel free to go and have a look.
This book I really love.
Awakenings, the Heroes Within. Okay.
Yeah, by Carol Pearson. And it's basically around like the 12 archetypes of who we are. But I think that if anyone's interested from a writing perspective, but also from a presenting and communication perspective, it takes us through the hero's journey, which I think is really kind of, whether you're writing or presenting, is a good thing to explore and study as ourselves as the hero in our own journeys. And this one, I mean, this is a classic though.
Oh yeah, building, I have it there as well. Yeah.
So yeah, Donald Miller's Building a Story, and I think is an excellent book as well.
Very powerful. Yeah, I agree. Thank you very much, Alex. And also, again, before we close, is there anything else, a final message that you would like to share with the listeners? Is there maybe a question that you wish I asked you that I didn't do? Anything else you'd like to share with the audience?
I think if I just had to leave people with one message, you know, whether you're speaking or you're writing, don't be afraid to share who you are and what your story is, because someone out there is waiting to hear it.
Amazing. Alex, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you also enjoyed it. I hope our listeners have enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you very much again for accepting our invitation, and looking forward to keeping in touch in the next few weeks and months and years. And I wish you all the best for your current and future projects. All the very best, Alex. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Grazie.
Prego.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Ideas on Stage podcast, there are many more you might like, so please subscribe, leave us a review, and tell us what you think. You can find many more ideas on business communication at ideasonstage.com, or by searching for Ideas on Stage on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and goodbye for now.